Welcome, everyone. Are we live? I'm Diana Ingram, Executive Director here at Hill Center at the Old Naval Hospital. Welcome to everyone joining us on Facebook. I'm always curious, is there anyone who's never been in the building before? Welcome, and please come back. I'd like to give a special thank you in this beautiful building that was commissioned by Abraham Lincoln as the very first naval hospital. Give a very special thank you to the Capitol Hill Community Foundation, whose generous support makes this sort of community programming available and free of charge. So many thanks to the Capitol Hill Community Foundation. And it's a great pleasure to collaborate with Andrew Lightman, the Managing Director of the Hill RAG, an essential part of our local democracy. And thank you for organizing this evening, and I'll let you introduce the panel.
I have a little piece of paper. Let me grab this so I don't forget anything. I'm Andrew Lightman. I'm the managing editor of the Hill RAG. For those of you who don't know, I want to start by thanking both the Hill Center, which has provided the venue for this wonderful event, and also the Ward 6 Democrats, who are also our partner in this event. As many of you are aware, these are difficult times for local news organizations. Capitol Hill is fortunate to have its own newspaper. The Hill RAG will celebrate its 50th anniversary in 2026. The paper has grown from a 2-page flyer of business cards to 116 pages monthly, as well as a daily news website. We are particularly proud of our reporter, Liz O'Gorick, who's going to put her hand up right now. Liz wrote 2 groundbreaking features on carjacking that are the starting point for tonight's panel. I'd also like to thank Ward 6 Councilmember Charles Allen for agreeing to moderate tonight's discussion, which I hope will provide the community with both more information and perhaps provide some new ideas about how to hold carjackers accountable and deter them, and also why people are carjacking to begin with. Let me introduce our panel. I've introduced Liz. Let's also, this is Commander Hall from MPD, who is our wonderful head of our 1st District. Matthew Graves, who's our U.S. Attorney. The D.C. Attorney General, Brian Schwab. Credible Messenger, Reginald Mathis of the D.C. Building Blocks Violence Interruption Program. Miss Hardy, I'm going to mispronounce it. I'll just stick with Joanna Hardy, who is the founder of an anti-violence program called Guns Down Friday. And then lastly, Kevin McGill. Kevin has been fostering D.C. children since 2016. He and his husband, John, were named the district's Foster Parents of the Year in 2022, and he's had personal experience with his foster children with the issue of carjacking. So with all of that, I will turn it over to Charles Allen.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to try to channel my best Tom Sherwood to moderate tonight. We do have a fantastic panel here. I want to also thank Andrew, Liz, the Hill Center, and everybody on our panel for joining the conversation tonight. Of course, to all of you for taking the time out to join us here. Tonight's conversation is going to be an extension of the reporting that the Hill RAG did. I'm going to call up Liz O'Gorick in just a little bit. If you have not had a chance to read those 2 stories, I recommend you do so. I have a hunch you're going to find a copy of the Hill RAG around here somewhere, so you can find that. I think at the heart of it, though, and the reason why we're in a packed room tonight, and I know there's a lot of people that are online and a lot of people that want to know what's going on and couldn't even be here tonight, is because this is an incredibly pressing issue for our neighborhood and for our city right now. I think folks are alarmed. I think folks are angry. I think folks are scared. I think folks want to know what are solutions and what is your city going to be doing to change the trajectory that we've seen. Tonight, the conversation is framed around asking the question of why. And I know for some folks, why is not actually their concern. They want to know what we're going to do about it. They want to see what the solutions are. And I think the spirit of the story and the spirit of the Hill RAG convening this is to help think through how do we think through what the why to be able to inform what the solutions are. I don't believe it's looking to say how are we making excuses for the why, but the why is in pursuit of solutions, and that's what we're going to try to steer our conversation to. I know many of you have heard me talk about this frequently. I think the solutions to our public safety challenges will be found in both an and solution rather than either or, meaning that we both have to ensure accountability when harm and violence takes place, and we have to work to prevent the violence in the first place, and both of those things have to happen at the same time. People who commit harm by carjacking or similar offenses, no matter their age, have got to have consequences and accountability. That's true of every crime. I think it's true of our conversation tonight. Everyone up here, I do believe, shares the exact same goal. The exact same goal. They want a very safe city. What we've seen right now is unacceptable in terms of the trajectory and the trends, and they want to be a part of the solutions to make sure that everybody, no matter where you are in this city, has a safe community. Before I also share a little bit of the level setting on some of the data, you know, I'm moderating this panel not just as your council member. I moderate this panel as a victim of violence myself. 15 years ago, I'm the victim of an armed robbery, of gun violence. I know what that trauma feels like. I carry the scar on the back of my head from that encounter. 2 young people. They were never caught. There's no accountability. And I had to work my own way through what that felt like and what that meant. So there are real people with every crime that takes place. And the victims and the ripple that it has across our community touches so many people, not just those individuals, but the families, the communities all around them. And so when we think about the violence or harm that we've seen, it just continues to ripple out and magnify. And I speak about that in the first person, but I know that we have many victims and many survivors. We have neighbors who have impacted this. And so it is deeply personal, I know, to a lot of people. Nationwide, when we're talking about carjacking, the offense of carjacking soared during the pandemic. Here in the district, though, in June of 2020, we started to see increases in carjacking that have simply not returned to pre-pandemic levels. 2023 was different, though. When we look at the numbers in 2021 and 2022, we had 428 carjackings in 2021, 458 carjackings in 2022. In 2023, we had 958 carjackings in the District of Columbia. 77% of those involved a gun. That 958 carjackings represents nearly a 100% increase in our city. It is astounding, it is deeply disturbing, and it has to be changed. And as I just said, behind every encounter and every crime, there are real-life harrowing experiences of our neighbors and of people in our community. Now, of the arrests that were made, 62% were juveniles, meaning that 38% were adults. 76% of those arrested lived in the district, which means about a quarter did not. The median age, 15. And 26 young people that were arrested were younger than 15. And we're going to talk with our panel about what we do from there and how those actions play out. When we look at our laws, DC's carjacking statute hasn't changed in decades. For adults, the law in the book, first-degree carjacking, includes a 15-year mandatory minimum and a 40-year maximum. I know we'll probably discuss that later. But tonight, we have a panel of folks who are going to help us think through and have a really great conversation tonight. Part of the questions I know we're going to be asking, what are the motivations that we're seeing? Are there common factors? What role does social media play in all of this? What are our role in the laws that we pass? How does our juvenile justice system treat our kids differently than in our adult system? And most importantly, how are we going to turn that number around? And what are the solutions we as community are looking to change? So I'm going to help guide the discussion tonight to make sure we give our panelists times to be able to answer questions. I know Andrew has told us he wants to try to encourage as much discussion in the panel as much as we can. I know that they also have cards and pens, I believe. What do you have, Andrew?
So we solicited questions submitted by email. Any of you who want to ask a question, put your hand up, and one of our volunteers will give you a pen and an index card. We will do the best we can to get to all of them. It's not really a Q&A as much as a discussion, but the council member will take your questions into account in
So they're going to feed me questions, apparently, up here in writing. Some of you also had written some questions in advance as well, so we've pulled some of those as well. And I've got some questions of my own as we go through this discussion. So to get us started, what I was going to do is ask Liz O'Garrick, the author of 2 articles in the Hill Rag. I'm going to ask her to come up to help level set a little bit, help lay the groundwork of what her reporting was, and then from there, we're going to turn into our panel. So Liz O'Garrick, let me hand the mic to you for a second.
Behind you so I don't pace in front of you, which I'm inclined to do. First of all, you guys, my name is like you stepped in something. I am Elizabeth O'Gorick, okay? I know I'm listed on your brochure things as a panelist. I'm not. I'm the general assignment reporter for the Hill Rag and the author of the 2 long-form articles on which this discussion is based. Deep sigh from Commander Hall. The first of those focused on why. Why does carjacking happen? We published it in September. We figured it came down to approximately 4 key points, all of which frankly overlap. First, it's easy. You're all familiar with the Kia Hyundai challenge. It's easy to steal a car. It's easy to get a gun. You got both of those things. You can go wherever you want and try to take what you want, right? But there's also a lot of need out there. There's need for food, housing, to solve loneliness, to get places. And in some ways, carjacking addresses some of those needs. But a lot of the kids don't just have deep needs for items and behaviors that need to be addressed. They also are growing up in extremely violent circumstances. Some of them are scared to step out of their doors for fear they'll be shot. Some of them are living in extremely violent domestic contexts. This takes a little bit of the edge off the kind of empathy folks like me might have come to expect, right? It's also a bit of a trend right now, guys. I don't know if you know, but our kids are out there on the streets teaching each other how to carjack. They're recording it. They're learning it on social media. They're tagging it, #FreeCars, #DCBoy, right? This is a popular thing right now. Maybe some of you remember the West Coast, East Coast rap. It's a little bit similar where violence is a little bit of a trend, but it's particular to DC, right? So it's a trend. Our second article focused on process. That article came out in December. As the council member notes, somewhere between 65 and 70% of those arrested are kids, but only approximately 17%, arrests only account for 17% of carjacking. So it's a pretty small percentage, right? You will know that we will have been told that kids have undeveloped full frontal lobes, so they don't understand consequences until they're somewhere around 25. And I have been told the DC's justice system accounts for this. The goal is to prevent kids from reoffending, not to punish them, to protect their futures from their past. That means for many of us, we have no idea what's going on in the juvenile justice system. It's opaque to protect them, but it means we don't know if anything happens after a crime takes place. There's a lot of really great programs coming out of the juvenile justice system: restorative justice, behavioral health, substance abuse. Sometimes kids can go through these programs as an off-ramp out of the system, but we call it a singular system. These are multiple agencies addressing children's needs. Any one of them can help, and any one of them could fail a child at any part. You give a kid a program where they have to go to school with an individual education program and that school doesn't have the resources, that kid's going to fail in that program. You give them 8 weeks till they meet a counselor, that kid's going to fail in that program. The very agencies that are supposed to be supporting kids sometimes are the ones that fail them. This is, as Eduardo Ferreira from the Georgetown Juvenile Justice Initiative told me, the very essence of systemic failure. When why kids carjack doesn't align with the things we do to help them not reoffend, we have a disconnect, and that, my friends, is what we're here to talk about.
Thank you, Liz. So make sure you grab your copy of the Hill Rag and read that. Thank you, Liz. All right. So first, I was going to start with a series of questions kind of talking about, from each of your vantage points and perspectives, what is it that you're seeing in our community and what's happening right now? And I'll start with you, Commander Hall, since you're sitting next to me. You are often on the scene of a carjacking. You are working with you and your officers both to help support a victim who has just suffered that violence. You are also in the process of being able to apprehend a suspect in that. As you look at this last year, where we've seen such a dramatic increase, not just in the district, but even around the district as well, because I do want to note the district's not alone in this, when you think about the jurisdictions around us too. What are some of the common trends that you have seen in either the motivation, in either the circumstances that you feel like you see different this past year than you may have seen in previous years?
Right, so I'd say is it on? There we go. All right. So I'd say
was mentioned about the Kia Challenge. Kind of started out the year last year where we really saw something unique that just exploded, and hundreds of cars being stolen where we hadn't seen that level previously. It kind of started the tide rolling, and then we got into the carjacking. So I think there's a nexus there between stealing the cars, leading into carjackings and more violence, which is something that I think is a troubling trend of the entire incidents, as they go. But a lot of these kids are doing them. They're younger. We just encountered a 9-year-old last week, and it's just really, of an association of family members, associates, and a lot of it's starts in the home, but these are troubled kids in troubled homes that then teach each other how to do it. And we really do see a lot of it as challenging each other. It's about your status, your reputation, building that through these types of events, and then leading on and just continuing into that. So, I mean, the youth of it, last year we saw younger and younger, and we're still seeing a lot of young kids. So that's something that's different. The stealing of the autos, the violence involved in some of these escalated. So, I mean, those are the things that we saw. And I think a lot of it's been around for a long time. I mean, I've been on the police department for going 26 years. Kids have always stolen cars. I started out in the 1st District many years ago, and it used to be little Dodge Neons. They would steal them because they were very easy to steal. But there weren't as many children or youth involved in the carjackings and the violence. So it's kind of the trend that we saw. And then, we had to develop ways to counter that, whether it's just following the data where they're going. We can kind of predict where they're going, working with the juvenile system as much as possible to track their movements. There's definitely some issues with that portion of the system. But, moving into the next year, that's, hopefully we're going to see a decline in that kind of activity because we have gotten on a lot of it. It is, not every juvenile out there. There's a group of them. So once we get to know who they are, we kind of can know where they're going and some of their patterns and motivations and where to find them. They will post on, social media what they're doing, which also is a lot of times how they get caught. So that's another thing that we've seen. And then that goes into even some of the violence that we've seen in the district with drill music, rap music. All those things get tied together when you bring into neighborhood beefs, neighborhood disputes, things like that. So, those are the trends, those are the things, those are what we're watching throughout as we enter the next year.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And I was going to turn to the Attorney General just a moment around how to, actually, one more quick question, then I'm going to go to the Attorney General. I was going to ask you as well about some of the trends you see. Last night, for example, I believe there were 3 carjackings that took place in Ward 5. It ended with an arrest, and it was the same group of teens that committed all 3 carjackings in fairly close proximity to one another, kind of between Ward 4 and Ward 5. We had not too long ago a carjacking down in Ward 6 in Southwest where I believe they were teens, carjacked a vehicle, drove it, I believe, a block and a half, and then left the car there. Are there specific trends you see in the actions of either repeated over the course of a night, a group that creates repeated carjackings, or for a specific purpose?
Right, that's something that we also really saw an uptick in is just repeat offenses on top pattern robberies, carjackings. Some nights we would get the same crew of children or juveniles that would commit 8 carjackings in a night. And sometimes they do just drive them a short distance. It makes you scratch your head. We just had one, probably the one you're talking about, where they drove around the corner, parked in an alley. There was another one, the Navy Yard, they did about the same thing. They drove it a few blocks and came right back to where they started. And it's baffling, really. And a lot of it is just it's something to do sometimes, and it's something to post about, something to talk about, something to build a reputation. A lot of times they'll take the phones. One of the things that you see repeatedly is taking of the phone and tossing it out the window. So that's one of the things we first try and track, and they're on to that. So That's why we came out with the AirTag deployment, those types of things. Is if we can track them, a lot of times we can, apprehend them pretty quickly. We made some success in that last year, and we're continuing to do that. But yeah, definitely the short distances. They don't keep the same car all night long, and that's where we'll get multiple carjackings in one night.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Attorney General Schwab. So we talked about the stats when MPD does make an arrest, and that then comes to your shop. So as the Attorney General, and maybe a quick level set for folks as to what role the Attorney General plays in this in terms of prosecutions. But in addition to that, was going to ask you what you're dealing with that, prosecuting that young person. And I assume within that context, you're also talking and trying to learn about what is the motivation behind that. What have you seen in this last year or over the last year or so that you think helps start to talk about the why and the motivation and understanding why we're seeing this take place?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question, and thank you all for being here tonight. Liz, thank you for your journalism, because I think the pieces that you wrote they're long form and they allow some more nuance and discussion of what's really going on. I wish I could tell this audience that I had a crystal ball to know what's going on in the minds of young people. Level set that I believe that the majority of carjackings that are happening in our city are being committed by young people, but we don't know that for sure because so many carjackings are not closed. There's no arrest made. We also know that when we really want to see deterrence work in a system, we need to have prompt arrest, certain swift consequences. And when so many cases don't result in a closure, we have a challenge in a criminal justice system. I think our young people are being impacted by a couple of factors. One, we have a post-pandemic existence that we're living in right now where many young people, particularly those who are engaged in this, were totally disengaged from their protective factors for a long period of time. And we know that one of the basic human needs is belonging with others. So we have kids who are disconnected from their families, disconnected from their homes, disconnected from their schools. They are making community with other young people and young people making bad decisions together. Much of this is driven by peer pressure. Much of this is driven by boredom. We are seeing the phenomena of social media playing a role in this across a lot of our phenomena today, but certainly with carjacking, in real time, posting, bragging, celebrating the joy of stealing cars. They are having fun doing it and they're posting about it. These are usually, we see crimes of opportunity. I have sat in on restorative justice circles. I've sat in with other interviews where the comments that come out it was, why? And the answer is, well, the victim was there. We came upon the victim. Somebody told me a story about, somebody was coming out of a gym early in the morning, 6 in the morning. She had just had her workout. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time, which is part of the reason why this is such a terrifying phenomena in our city and very different than what we've seen. We used to know, and probably still today know, that gun violence and homicides are somewhat more predictable about location. Our Cure the Streets program is in the 10 neighborhoods in our city where we've had the historically highest levels of gun violence. Carjacking, however, is random. It's happening everywhere. It's happening at all different times, and that adds to the terrifying nature of this crime. We also know we have a phenomenon in addition to in addition to social media and the pandemic, we've got way too many guns in the District of Columbia. 77% of the carjacking in our last year where there was an offense involved a gun. Now, fortunately, most carjackings do not involve in a shooting and do not involve in a death, but they are extremely traumatic, dangerous events that we need to reposition as not crimes against property, but crimes against people. And I know that another phenomenon, I think maybe Mr. McGill will talk a little bit about it, is the fact that many young people do not see this as a violence against a human being. They see it as a property crime. They stole a car, they hot-wired a car, they joyrode in a car, and they don't see the human impact involved in what's happening. A lot of drivers, Uber drivers, Instacart drivers, people who are trying to make a living and trying to get the food or the delivery to where they want, they park their car, they run the food up, and somebody's grabbing them, pushing them out of the way, stealing the car. And the mindset of that 14, 15, 16-year-old is, I'm just stealing a car. Not the kind of impact and empathy and view you have as you grow older to see that there is a human being that has been terrified, terrorized, going to bring that trauma back. Plus, you've got 13 and 14-year-old kids who do not have their driver's license screaming away in cars. And we're lucky that we haven't seen more fatalities in the auto accidents. We've had some tragic stories. But with 900 and some carjacking offenses, I think probably have less than 20, I don't know what the numbers are, of fatal car accidents that happen with kids screaming away. So that's kind of what we're seeing, and I know we'll have some conversation about the juvenile justice system, but important to level set for everybody, and I know probably everybody in this room knows this. Matt Graves is the U.S. Attorney, appointed by the President. We're lucky to have a U.S. Attorney like Matt Graves who lives here in the city, raising his kids in the city, cares about D.C. Not always the case with the U.S. Attorney, depending on what the administration is and who he or she may be. But he is appointed by the federal government. He has a role as the U.S. Attorney, and his primary criminal jurisdiction is adults and violent crime for adults. The Attorney General elected, we have a new elected Attorney General as of 2014, still relatively new office. But my job, among other things, is to prosecute juvenile crime, defined as younger than 18. There are some crimes, if they are serious, enumerated in the statute, if a 16 or 17-year-old commits it, can be charged as an adult. We call those Title 16 cases. In our system, the U.S. Attorney exercises the judgment on whether or not a young person who's 16 or 17 should be tried as an adult. As I said, we are lucky to have a Matt Graves as our U.S. Attorney because he doesn't have to have the relationship with our office that he does, where he consults, where we communicate about Title 16 youth. He hasn't yet given me a vote or a veto over his decision, but he at least will consult. And that says a lot, because I don't think there's any more important life-changing decision as to whether a young person is going to go from the juvenile system into the adult system. That's a life-altering decision. So that's how our system works. And in the juvenile system, unlike the adult system, there are bench trials in the family court, not jury trials. And if a young person is proven beyond a reasonable doubt to have committed a crime, the option for the court is to commit that young person for what's considered juvenile life, up to the time that child is 21 years old. That's the rules in the District of Columbia. It's also the rules in our country. Our Supreme Court has recognized that we have a juvenile system and we have an adult system. And that's some of the basics of the way our adult system works. And I'm sure we'll come back to talk a little bit about how prosecution of carjackings happen in the juvenile system.
Great. Thank you, A.G. Schwab.
Sure.
You anticipated my question a little bit, so I do want to, after this, Mr. Graves, I'm going to go to the other side of the panel. Managing 6 panelists is we're gonna get there. But I did want to ask Mr. Graves, as the federal U.S. Attorney, and A.G. Schwab set you up there real well there. There are instances when the federal USAO will charge a child as an adult, and it's a very serious decision. But it is one that you have a variety of factors that you think about to do that. We're going to get more into some of the other prosecutorial parts later in the discussion, but on this element, I think it might be helpful. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And so could you share a little bit about your decision-making, your team's decision-making, when you see something that says, we are going to make, which is a fairly dramatic decision, to charge a young person as an adult and enter them now into the adult system?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for putting the panel on this really important topic. So I want to start with where Brian ended, and I want everyone to know just how coordinated our two offices are. You know, it's not a system that's necessarily set up for success when you have these bifurcated responsibilities between DC and the federal government. And I just want everyone to know we are making it work. Our teams are in constant communication. We are in regular communication. This is our second time together today. So we talk about all the issues that cross our office repeatedly, and none is more challenging than the Title 16 issue, right? No prosecutor becomes a prosecutor because he wants to charge 16 or 17-year-olds as adults. That said, in our estimation, there are some crimes committed by a very small percentage of our juveniles that are adult conduct and should be treated as such. And in the context that we're talking about tonight, armed carjacking, what are we looking for when we're deciding whether we're going to charge this person as an adult? So there was the reference earlier to the science on brain development and executive functioning, and we are sympathetic to the science. We believe in the science. To us, that science is at its strongest when you're talking about impulsive crimes. Brian's office has prosecuted some horrific homicides that we haven't even thought about exercising our Title 16 discretion because they truly are impetuous acts, as terrible as they are. And, that's where the science says this person is still a child, right? To me, pattern and spree carjackings are different, right? What we are increasingly seeing are 16, 17, 18, and 19-year-olds that when we really dig in and start investigating, pulling apart phones, getting into social media accounts, we're tying to 4, 5, 10 carjackings over a long period of time. In our estimation, that stops looking like the impetuous crime of a child. It looks like the calculated crime of an adult, and it should be prosecuted as such.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think it's helpful to help level set where that is. All right. I think it's got to be noted. We are talking about young people committing crimes, teenagers, children. I believe, and if I'm wrong, it's all my fault. I believe probably the average age on the panel here is probably around 50. I believe the average age in the room is probably going to be somewhere in that ballpark. Mr. Mathis, I was going to start with you. As the Office of Gun Violence Prevention and Building Blocks and the different efforts you make there, you're working with young people. So as we are trying to, again, understand why do we see some of these actions taking place, we're going to get more into the accountability pieces, and then we're going to talk about some of those prevention pieces. But again, we're still in that, why are we seeing that? From your experience and the work you're doing, working with a lot of communities and in particular young people, what is it that you're seeing that helps us better understand the why, which can then lead to our solutions to stop what it is that we're seeing?
Thank you for having me. When your home is not functioning normally, right, or positively, you could be owed bonds outside of the home, and the influence of those outside people becomes stronger than what's going on in your house. So you start to get with your peers, and some of your peers don't have the best decision-making skills themselves. So you're falling behind your peers, and you go down the road. Because in the beginning, you might just be the rider in the car, right? And then they're like, man, you never drove the car. You never did it. You never did it. And then you start to grow. As you get away with it, you start to grow and build up more courage. You start to build up more courage to do these things. But it all starts with the home being broken, or somewhere in your life something has failed you, right? Your adverse childhood experiences, and then you start trauma bonds, and you build trauma bonds with your peers. And then once you build that bond with your peers, almost nothing can separate that bond.
Thank you. Ms. Hardy, let me pull you in. You're somebody who is helping lead a lot of work that is deep mentorship, that is trying to identify young people that have either committed harm or at risk of committing harm or have been victims of harm. And let's make sure we're being honest. Most people, there's not two separate buckets. That's usually the exact same bucket of folks that have both experienced harm, that cause harm. Help share your perspective as well about some of the ways that you see our young people acting and those motivations behind it.
Yeah, so as he said, I'm the founder of Guns Down Friday, but I also hold a position at Children's National where I see every child in D.C. that is shot, that is stabbed and injured in a fight. As you speak, Charles, I think about a 12-year-old that I met. He was on his fifth car. He was a car boy. We were helping this kid. And then a few months later, he said, Miss Hardy, I stopped stealing cars, but he was still breaking into cars. So I said, why are you breaking into cars? And he's like, I just want to get the change out. So he just wanted to get the change so, he can get him some snacks. So I see a lot of situations where, the kids are bored. This kid also wasn't in school. So our organization, we did all we can. Fast forward to today, this kid is in school. He's doing all he can, and he's also on house arrest until he's 21 years old. My heart goes out to these children. Like he said, we do deep mentorship. A few years ago when I started, I had all these children. I had about 20 kids. And then 2 of my kids that I work with were shot. So I said, you know what? I'm going to narrow it down. I'm just going to take a few kids and I'm going to change these kids' lives. So one of my ambassador, he's here today. Raise your hand, Makai. Yeah, we got Makai here. And the things these kids witness will blow your mind. I met Makai because, he was outside playing and witnessed a murder and had to go back to school the next day. So, these kids, they're dealing with a lot. Representation for the bottom, are you here? That's Marcellus. Y'all give Marcellus a hand, please. So Marcellus, he's also a guru in the community. Brought a few young men out. When they called us, I said, the people. Let's keep it real. The people the youth that are committing the crimes are most involved. They need to be at this table. They need to be here. They need to hear what's going on. They have the solutions. They know why. They're doing what they do, or their friends are doing what they do. So, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. Mr. McGill, I was going to pull you in now. You shared your story and lived experience in the article, and I know it's even longer than what is printed there. So to the extent that you want to share some of that, please do. But I also would love for you to be able to talk a little bit about, as a foster parent, when you see a young person who's in crisis, a young person who is making bad decisions, where has the city failed? In some of the examples, and you and I talked about this before, you're not speaking for every foster care parent, or every foster parent's experience. You're not speaking for every child's experience, but you're speaking your own lived experience. And so from your perspective, where have you seen those failures where the city's got to do more and better?
Yeah. So this is a bit emotional, so so we've been foster parents for almost a decade. We've been foster parents for about a decade, and this issue came into our homes about 2.5, 3 years ago as this problem exploded in the city. Just exactly what Reggie said. He described it exactly. It starts riding around in free cars. So free car is a stolen vehicle, and a kid will bring another kid along to ride around in the back seat. And one of our kids, age 13, I found a video on his phone, him in the back seat, and he was smoking a J, and he filmed himself, and he sent it to a girl to impress a girl. So that was one experience. And then 6, 8 months later, it was evident that another kid that we were fostering was riding around free cars, at least. And then one night, in the back of our home, police lights are flashing, and I open the back door as a commotion, and there's a policeman arresting my foster son. He and some friends had pulled an Uber driver out of his car, and I've told this story to some of you before. Pulled an Uber driver out of the car a couple blocks from our home, took off, and I guess MPD was nearby, and they happened to be pursued, and they went down a dead end, and they stopped, and he jumped out, and he got followed by MPD officer right to my backyard, was arrested behind my house. I had to watch this. I knew about all this stuff. My kids were watching, Glock X and 03 Osama, so I knew the songs that they were listening to, glorifying this stuff. So I knew this stuff, but it was something to have it right there at home. The thing that got me talking to people, and I introduced myself to the Attorney General after he was elected, and my new council member for my district, was what happened next. So this boy is 15 years old, still in my life now and doing well. Okay, there are good stories here. He was arrested. He was locked up downtown where the juveniles are locked up. I spent the evening reading about, diversion programs and restorative justice, and I was getting ready, okay? So I was thinking, okay, he's been involved in this stuff. Here's an opportunity to turn it around. The next morning, the public defender that was assigned to him called me and said, they're no papering this. And I didn't know what that meant, so I asked her to explain it. And what it meant is they were dropping the charges. And he was released that day. That was it. That was it. No follow-up, no support, no nothing. And that was happening at volume in this city, okay, at volume. And the reason was we don't want to further traumatize kids by putting them in a criminal justice system. We don't want to harm them more. But what ended up happening is it introduced more kids to the problem. It spread it like a virus, okay? So we had a virus here 4 years ago. We shut our schools down for a year and a half. It didn't even affect children, right? Children were 1,000 times less susceptible to COVID than adults. But we shut our schools down, blew up those children's lives to stop a virus spreading. Here's a virus that's killing children, okay? Yeah. I mean, do you people know the names? Kendra Outlaw, 15 years old, died in a car that she and another friend had jacked and were speeding in Northeast a few months ago. Bernard Torrey Jr. is a 13-year-old who was shot by a security guard in the midst of a carjacking a few months ago right outside the D.C. courthouse. There's another kid named that's not as well known in the community, Milwaukee Young. I want to mention his name. He was shot to death on B Street, a block and a half from where I live. He was in a beef between the LaDroit crew and the CH crew, and there was a car involved, and he didn't return the car, and he got shot to death for it. These are children. They don't know what the hell they're doing. We have let this virus spread, and you have to shut it down, and that involves stopping the spread of this problem. So I mean, no offense to anybody on the stage, but I reached out to my new council member when he was elected, to the Attorney General in the fall of 2022, and I warned them. I said, I see this, it's in my house, right? And I see more and more kids being affected by this. This is about to explode, and you're gonna have to take very significant action. And with all due respect, exactly what I predicted happened. 950 carjackings last year. We've already had about 50, so we're below, but still on pace for over 500 this year. It's not being treated as the crisis that it is, and it requires suppression. I'm sorry, but you got to stop it from spreading before you can fix the underlying problems. That's my opinion.
No, I appreciate it, Mr. McGill. So let me turn a little bit to some of the issues that we've identified as well about young people, and I'm going to kind of draw on a little bit of the school conversation too. One of the things that we have seen in our city is a significant increase in chronic truancy and absenteeism in our schools. The most recent data that we have seen is that out of our high school kids in DC, a 60% chronic absenteeism and 47% truancy rate. Pre-pandemic, just so you have a comparison there, pre-pandemic, both were about 30%. That's not good either, but they have dropped slightly from pandemic highs, but they have remained much higher than other school systems that we see. Now, I'll caveat that we're not saying that every kid who's going to be truant or every kid who's absent is going to go commit carjacking. But we also know that when you see chronic truancy, chronic absenteeism, good things don't follow from that. Good outcomes don't come from that. So, Ms. Hardy, can you talk about, with some of the young people that you've worked with, what have you seen in terms of getting kids in school? There are barriers. We know that. We know there's transportation. We know there's going to be caregivers. There's going to be a lot of different challenges that sometimes happen. But what are some of the things that you've seen around truancy, around absenteeism, and how or what do you think we should be looking at as red flags that the city needs to move more quickly and more urgently to a young person who is exhibiting that level of absenteeism?
Yeah, so I just always think of a story when you ask the questions, but I think of a kid that I work with. The school called me and they said, Miss Hardy, he's missed 60 days. I said, well, have you called his mom? Have you called CPS? And, they've made all those calls, but, no one is being held accountable, not the parent, not any government official, so kids can miss school and nothing is done. Kids can steal a car and nothing is done. I think about the adult who said, hurry up with that paperwork because I'll be out of here before the ink dries. So, and then I think about the kids who have to catch the metro. It's so like they're put in schools in different neighborhoods. I think about the kid who was just on the front cover of Washington Post. I have to Uber him to school every day because his school is in the middle of a neighborhood that's beefing with his neighborhood, and it just doesn't make sense. I feel like the kids need school buses. You know, like these kids are afraid to go to school. I think about another kid who's special needs. It takes him 2 hours to get to school on the bus. So those little things make a huge difference. I think about a kid who was shot. He wasn't going to school. He got in our program. We Ubered him to school every day. It was really that simple. You know, he still missed a few days. But, you know, we Ubered him to school, and it made a difference. So that's something that's huge.
And just a quick question, who's paying for all those?
The donations of Guns Down Friday.
Right.
So I think my supporters. And I can't, also the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, they've been supporting. So shout out to them. We've been doing something called Stop the Bleed, where we're teaching children, families, how to use a tourniquet, what to do if you're shot or injured in a fight.
Yeah. Efforts around safe passages and getting kids to and from school, and for a lot of folks in this neighborhood are going to know, you know, this community, myself, our ANC commissioners, our Board of Education members have repeatedly asked over and over and over again for the mayor to fund safe passages at Eastern Market Metro, Potomac Avenue Metro, for all of our schools, and we've been turned down every time. Getting kids safely to school is so crucially important, and when we don't create that, then you pick that up, and we're grateful for it. But that's not fair to have an organization have to pay that. And pay those Uber
I
costs.
love DC Connect. I love the DCPS, but a lot of the kids I'm talking about, they go to charter schools. They don't go to public schools. They're going to these, you know, the schools that they don't go to public schools. So,
yeah. Mr. Mathis, if you want to, I'll ask you to see if you want to jump in there with Office of Gun Violence Prevention. Oftentimes, building blocks, OGVP, too many acronyms. You have different types of grant programs, and sometimes you try to use small dollar amounts, but have them flexible to be able to work with community partners, trusted community partners, to identify those gifts. Can you share a little bit about how we try to strategically use those to target those young people, be it the transportation to school or to other efforts?
So we believe the answer lies in the community, right? We think the community has the answer for the problem. So we fund everyday programming, things that like Ms. Joanna, like things that she does. We find people like that, and we fund their solution to the problem instead of us being downtown trying to create a solution. We've done things like yoga. We've done things like gardening. We have one lady, she has a program where she introduced called Peep This, where she introduced youth to different experiences in life. Just going out to a sushi bar, you know, how to order sushi, what different sushi is made up of. We had a lady who took kids on a retreat, kids who've never been outside of Washington, D.C. in their life, just to let them know that life is bigger than the community they come from. So we go into communities, we talk to community members, and we tell community members, like, that if you have that idea, then you should apply for our grant. We had some community members uptown, where the upper part of Northwest, where the D.C. cameras wasn't catching the people who were checking car doors. So they used the program, they used our grant to put private cameras on their property that caught better angles than the DC cameras. So it's been a host of things that's been done with the Building Blocks grant to help enhance and make the community safer.
Okay, thank you. Let me turn to A.G. Schwab and Mr. Graves here for a second. Because one of the things that Mr. McGill and Ms. Hardy talked about is when an arrest takes place. And I know sometimes, and I appreciate you kind of talk about what papering was, but so most people may not know what papering means, but papering is after the arrest, making the decision to actually move forward with the prosecution. The criticism that both your offices will get at times will be, what is your papering rate or your no papering rate? Could you help explain, just demystify it for a second so people understand that and the decisions you make? But also, the question is going to be, with that criticism you hear around a papering decision and the feel of MPD made the arrest, where's the consequence that comes after? Help address that.
Very common frustration, and I want to start with the fact that... We good? Okay, thanks. Start with the observation that the standard for the MPD to make an arrest, which is probable cause that a crime has been committed, is different than the standard that we hold out in our due process system for convicting people, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. So reasonable minds can differ, but sometimes there may be probable cause for an arrest, but not enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime has occurred. The prosecutors in my office, who are extraordinarily talented workers, hard workers and committed, and who are trying more cases now than historically given the uptick in crime, are going to act with integrity. We are not ever going to charge a crime that we do not believe in good faith we have the evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So sometimes we don't charge the case. That's called no papering. That's a hard decision to make, but it's the decision we're entrusted to make by assessing the evidence. Now, all crimes have elements that have to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. In carjacking, proving these cases can be particularly difficult for a variety of reasons. One, a lot of times these cases turn on an eyewitness identification. We need a reliable witness who can come to court and identify the person who committed the carjacking. Well, we know eyewitness testimony can be unreliable when you're under trauma and stress, and if you have a gun pointed in your face when it's dark and you have your car stolen from you and it happens like that, that is an extremely scary set of circumstances, and oftentimes witnesses cannot make an identification. Oftentimes there are multiple people involved. Oftentimes the hoods are on or a mask is on, and therefore making an eyewitness identification is very difficult. So we have to look to other evidence that might be available to try to build a case. Do we have cameras that may have caught the action happening? If we are investigating, might we get into the phones to see the Instagram feeds and the social media? Might we get a cooperating witness, somebody in the community, somebody in the family, to explain to us what they know? And oftentimes, we don't have enough evidence to charge on the day that a young person is arrested. So we then don't necessarily drop the case forever, even though we won't charge it that day. There will be ongoing investigations in close collaboration with MPD, further investigation with our colleagues in Prince George's County and Montgomery County. Oftentimes cases are made not on the day of the arrest, but subsequently. Those the no papering fact that happened on the day of arrest is part of our no papering statistics. Doesn't mean the case isn't going to be prosecuted or pursued later, just means on that day we didn't have enough evidence to make a charge. One of the things that we are seeing is that in the juvenile system, a young person has committed a series of carjackings before they're arrested. So you could have evidence of 7, 8, 9, 10 events over a period of time. In the juvenile system, it is not essential that we charge all 7, 8, 9, 10 of those events, because as I told you earlier, the maximum in the juvenile system is juvenile life. And so we may charge 2 or 3 of those cases where the evidence is the strongest and not charge the others. There are times when we have a young person who is already going to be prosecuted and committed to DYRS on another charge, already going to be taken care of in the system. So there's no purpose in us pursuing that prosecution against other demands on our resources. So the no papering rate is a data point that gets talked about and oftentimes gets reported, but it's important to understand what's really going into those decisions. At the end of the day, the rate is how many were presented for charges for carjacking and how many were charged for carjacking. But there can be a variety of reasons why certain cases are not charged. I think that answers your papering rate.
Mr. McGill, you want to jump in, and then I'm going to turn to Mr. Graves.
I think we said that roughly 2/3 of arrests for carjackings in the district are of juveniles. Is that right? 60-something% you said? And it's about 160 last year out of 900 and some carjackings resulted in an arrest. Am I on track?
A little less than that, but yep.
Okay. Of the 167 arrests, or of the arrests that were of juveniles that came to your office, what percentage were no papered?
On carjacking last year, approximately 61% were papered. So 39 to 40% were not papered.
How does that compare to, let's say, 2020, 2021 before the epidemic?
It's roughly the same percentage in terms of numbers. Of course, the denominator has gotten much bigger.
And then officer or commander, 167 out of 900 and some instances resulted in an arrest. It's a pretty low number. Why aren't more arrests being made in carjackings? Are you under-resourced to pursue this? Are there proactive programs out there to find? And the Attorney General said they're hard to prosecute because often there's not an eyewitness. Are there stings? Are there things being done to stop this from spreading?
And I'm going to add one question to that. I like the co-moderator. Is frequently, because we see individuals commit multiple carjackings, that an arrest, we're looking at a singular number of a person, but in actuality, we might have somebody who's going to be charged with multiple offenses along the way, and I see Mr. Graves shaking his head. So after that, I'm going to turn to Mr. Graves for a second.
Right. So to answer the question, number one, yes, more resources would help, more personnel. We have been, from 2020, we lost a great number of officers on the police department. So we've been trying to rebuild that. It has had an impact on operations. However, we've been able to still provide services to the community, for public safety. However, we're trying to rebuild. We're down around 3,400 officers now, which is around 400 to 500 less than where we were. At one time, we had 4,000 officers.
Why are we down 500-600 from where we need to be?
Well, there's many reasons for that. Through what has occurred over the last several years, throughout the country, there's been less folks applying to be a police officer. There's been people that don't want to do the job anymore because of what's been going on throughout the country, and it just is less appealing. One way you can really you have to attract people. It's a job. You're not born as a police officer. You don't come out with a uniform and a badge on. It's something you choose to do because you want to make a difference. But if conditions aren't attractive, sometimes that's hard to hire people for the job.
We have a national policing shortage. I mean, we think about our Metro Transit police, for example, are about 25% down.
Right.
So we see that across the board. And that is a factor that a lot of departments, which is why we passed a $25,000 signing bonus to help recruit new people and try to create new incentives such as housing programs. There's a lot of different incentives that we do, but there's a national policing shortage that's taking place. I want to turn to Mr. Graves, though, to be able to ask some of the same questions around the papering rate. And then I have a crime lab question I'm going to turn to you both on in just a second.
Absolutely. So the numbers that I'm tracking, focusing on armed carjacking, so carjacking where a firearm is used, there were 182 arrests last year. Of those 182 arrested, 139 were juveniles, so 75%. So within the subset of carjackers who are armed, it's even greater representation of juveniles. A couple things about the number. So first of all, I think MPD lists roughly 290 of the carjackings as being closed, which means that we already know that the reason we have fewer people arrested than number of closures is that MPD was able to tie up to its satisfaction multiple carjackings to at least some of those individuals. We also know on the prosecution side that this dramatically undercounts the number of carjackings the arrested individuals are likely responsible for, right? So we have a case that we have charged federally, an armed carjacking ring, where one person alone, we're now up to 10 carjackings. And it started at the time of arrest as 2 or 3. And the reason you get to 10 is you're able to go really deep with federal resources and start pulling in all kinds of information. As the Attorney General was saying earlier, if you get to a point where you get someone off the streets and you can prove up 1 or 2 armed carjackings, in a lot of cases, that is what you're going with. You're not trying to find you don't have the resources to find every carjacking. So I do want people to know, because I think the number's jarring, that we believe the people arrested actually account for a pretty good chunk of the carjackings that are occurring. With respect to charging, so there is just a lot of confusion and frankly misinformation around this number, and some of these numbers, when you hear them out of context, just sound scary and like that can't be right. And when you hear that and something like that, and you have that reaction of that can't be right, I want you to allow for the possibility that it is not right. So the council over the summer passed a requirement that a DC agency the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council published a bunch of data related to various criminal safety metrics. While we are federal and not subject to council law, we think that this law is a very good idea and have voluntarily agreed to work with the agency to provide data. So we've started posting data. What that data shows in its first posting, which covered the first 9 months of last year, was that in 88% of violent crimes committed with a firearm, we charged at the time of arrest. And as the Attorney General said, in that 12% that we couldn't charge at the time of arrest, where there were investigative avenues that we thought might give us enough evidence to go forward, we pursued those. And then some of those people were subsequently charged. It's also very challenging because we just threw two numbers out that were very different. We have very different systems. If you were looking at firearms arrests, right, you would see, I think, the Attorney General's office charged somewhere around 90% of those at the time of arrest. For us, for firearms possession, it was 64%. There are different systems and different facts. The best example of that, I think, is if you look at their data, their adult firearms charging rate is around 50%. So for almost 40 points lower. It's not because the Attorney General enjoys prosecuting juveniles more than he does adults. They're just different systems and different laws, and this is what we're all dealing with. Each of these cases are different, and we're doing our level best to bring charges whenever we think we ethically can.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Graves. I've got some questions that are coming from the audience, which is great. We do have to stop around 8:30, so I'm going to ask one last question here, and then I want to start getting to a lot of your questions that are here. And that is to both of our prosecutors. When we're talking about the accountability and the efforts around prosecutions, I want to ask you about the DC Crime Lab, Department of Forensic Sciences. So this morning, the city administrator announced and said that pointed to the USAO and OAG discrediting the DFS. Actually, it was ANAB, which removed its accreditation. However, he also said and acknowledged the loss of the accreditation that DFS had directly impacted the ability to prosecute burglaries, thefts, and other charges because, for anybody level setting here, the crime lab is the independent crime lab that does that analysis that then is the evidence that is used in court. I want to see if you want to have a chance to have a reaction to that the allegation is that you discredited the DFS, but that did it have an impact on your ability to prosecute cases?
So I don't want to spend too much time on history, just very quickly. In 2021, we had occasion to question the testing results that was provided to us that was helpful in a case that we were prosecuting, a serious homicide that we were prosecuting. We asked questions about it of DC's Department of Forensic Sciences. There was a lot of back and forth. We didn't get clear answers. It eventually came out that they realized that their tests were wrong and they tried to cover it up. That led to their accrediting agency pulling their accreditation. That is not a coordinated effort to try to pull down a DC agency. That is us doing our job consistent with our ethical obligations of not sponsoring evidence that we believe to be tainted. So that's the past, and that occurred before I came into the role. Where we've been since then is trying to clean up what's come after it. And this really was, when people ask what happened in 2021 and 2022, it was a perfect storm. The city had lost its Department of Forensic Sciences, which meant in all kinds of cases, we could no longer prove that suspected drugs were in fact drugs. That basically ground drug prosecutions to a halt. We could no longer have DNA through the city, so everyone is scrambling to find private labs to do the essential DNA testing that you needed. Fingerprints, firearms, I could go on and on. This is coming at the same time that the court system has effectively been shut down for a year or two, and a tremendous backlog of cases had built up to the point that there were serious questions of whether we would just have to drop a bunch of cases because when the court turned our clock for charging back on, we would not be able to charge, we physically would not be able to charge people quickly enough because we couldn't get enough cases in the grand jury. This is an incredibly challenging period. The good news is we've worked through a lot of these challenges. Some of them we've triaged. Some of them we were able to resolve in a couple of months. Some took much longer. But at some point last year, we got to the point where we at least had workarounds for all of these problems. and the system was starting to function where it was functioning pre-pandemic. And then the good news is that the Department of Forensic Science got reaccredited in 2 areas. It now has a license to drug test and conduct DNA testing again. This is kind of an important mile marker. It is not the end of the story. They now need to rebuild back up their capacity. It's going to be a journey, but it's a journey we're committed to taking with them and doing everything we can to have our courts recognize them as experts once again.
Thank you. A.G. Schwab, do you think you want to add to that? I thought Mr. Graves did a great job there.
He certainly did. He certainly did.
All
I
right.
think that one thing for everybody to remember when we're talking about, and it really is important, I think, as we alluded to, for law enforcement and government and community to be aligned and linking arms when we're talking about public safety. There's way too much finger pointing and blaming that goes on, and that's not helpful. The accreditation of a crime lab is the floor. It's the floor. We had an accredited lab, and the city came across this challenge that Matt just referenced. So it's not just getting accreditation back. We have to have confidence that the scientists and the culture of a lab means that we're going to make sure we're putting on reliable evidence. Because again, as much as we want to hold people accountable, our system of due process and making sure that we have a system that is reliable and that the evidence we put forward and sponsor is reliable. And when we give that up, when we give up a commitment to the rule of law, we're lost. And so we're going to continue to work. Matt's office has a larger volume of cases for which the forensics of that lab are critical, but it does affect juvenile cases too. I mentioned the fact that we look for corroborating evidence in a carjacking. Well, we may not have a good eyewitness, but do we have a fingerprint? Do we have some DNA in the car? Are we able to cobble together the evidence to make our burden? And when we don't have a functioning lab, we can't do that as easily as we should, and we're spending a tremendous amount of taxpayer dollars contracting with labs outside of the city. So all of us as taxpayers should be frustrated because we built a state-of-the-art lab in the 2011-2012 time period. We all paid for that. And then it went dark because it lost its accreditation because of a failure that should never have happened. So I'm hopeful we're going to get back on track. I'm about looking forward on this. As Matt said, that was before I got elected, but it's still impacting. It's still impacting our system.
Thank you. All right, I want to turn to some of the questions that have been coming in from the audience. So, Commander Hall, let me start with you. Someone heard you say that as you're looking at the terrain, you're looking at the trends, you believe that the carjacking trend will start to go down this year. And so the question that this person asked is, what are you seeing that's changing that would lead you to that belief that you're starting to see carjacking go down?
Right. I do believe that it will go down this year. I'm hopeful for the coming year. I think we're going to have a much better year than we did already. We've started out, at least in the first district, already better than we did last year. Part of the reason I think that is because we did go through last year and we saw what happened. We have made many arrests. We know who many of the groups are that are committing these acts, so it makes it easier to go back. A lot of them have been identified. A lot of them are, unfortunately in the system. So we know where some of these people are going to once a carjacking has been committed. We know more of the trends. We know what to look for. So I think we're better. We've come up with systems, strategies to combat it. We use more air support. We've made towards the end of the year, we made a lot of arrests, just as the prosecutors talked about some of the great cases that have involved 10 carjackings, rings of carjacking, suspects. We've had search warrants on top of that and long-term investigations where we've brought down a lot of rings of folks that are involved in that. So I think that's had an impact, and that's why in the last part of the year in the first district, we saw them decrease, and we're still seeing that coming out in the first month here of January, a real decrease. I'm happy to report, especially in this neighborhood over here where we had some problems last year. So, I'm very hopeful. I think that those things will help support us as we go into the next year.
Okay. Thank you, Commander. And I'll just note, according to MPD, and obviously these numbers are not where we want them to be still, because it's got to be lower in this, but homicides, as we close out the month of January, homicides are down 40%, assault with dangerous weapons down 31%, burglaries down 14%, motor vehicle theft down 19%, theft from auto down 28%. So still not where we want to go, but I think what your point is, you're starting to see 1 month at least that starts to give you some optimism around some of the trends.
The numbers are coming down, and one is too many, but it's a start.
Yeah.
We have.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Celeste had sent us a question in advance, and I'm going to send this one to Mr. Matheson, maybe Mr. Schwab, for a quick answer. And I will ask all of our panelists to have shorter answers, as we're going to try to get through a bunch of these questions here before we have to wrap up. The question was, how are existing violence prevention and interruption programs being used to address juvenile carjacking? What changes or additions to the programs would make them more effective at preventing carjackings? And it might be good just to do a quick what is a violence intervention program, because they are very geographic based, they're very neighborhood focused, not necessarily carjacking focused, but give you a chance to have a quick answer.
Very quickly, the landscape for violence interruption is shifting. Before it was neighborhood based, like the council member said. Now we have to shift to follow the trend in crimes. And also imagine trying to connect these people to government services without even knowing these people, right? So the people that's trusted adults or violence interruptions or violence prevention based workers, they're the trusted adults that can get in contact with these young people or introduce these young people to these services and give them the courage to, change the way they do things.
Thanks. Let me ask this question here that was sent in. What do you see as resources that there are for parents of at-risk or troubled kids in the case of a no paper? It kind of gets to what Mr. McGill had talked about, just seeing absolutely nothing, frankly. When a young person is arrested, but then the choice is to no paper, is there nothing? And then as part of our goal here tonight is also to be talking about solutions. Is that a space where we should really be targeting where the city can invest, partner with trusted community partners? That would be a partnering with the AG's office and others to help think about what does that look like, because we heard, at least in a sample size of 1, a complete failure, though, of how it left a parent feeling, what the impact was on a family and a ripple out. As we talk about where are solutions that you want to see your city invest and you see your city take different action, is that a space?
Yes. How's that for short? Look, we ask too much of our criminal justice system. We need to surround young people before they're in the system, when they're in the system, and after they are coming out of the system with support. And as Mr. Mathis indicated, when you have committed to a young person to rehabilitate at DYRS or through the probation process, or having been committed, and we dump him or her back in to a place where there's no support, no adult, no love, no hope, we should know that the result is going to be predictable. The good news is where it's predictable, it's preventable. And so, yes, we as a city and a community need to be much more focused on prevention and surrounding young people and their families with resources if we want to be safer in the long run. We cannot prosecute and arrest our way out of it, even though we're going to do our best to bring good cases and hold kids accountable. We're going to be having this same conversation if we don't focus on the fact that we need to change the underlying conditions that these kids are growing up in. And that requires housing support, requires health support, it requires educational support, requires economic development and job development, mental health treatment, all of the things that a whole of government approach looks like. And when you keep looking to the criminal justice system and prosecutors and jails to solve social issues, we are never going to get ahead of this. We'll do our part, but we need everybody to do their part.
Thank you. Ms. Hardy, you want to jump in?
Yes. So this is a big one for me, but there's no. Hello. There's no real accountability. When a child is shot, we scramble to find resources for these kids. We have the interrupters, the Cure, who focuses on the gang violence, but a lot of these children are not a part of a gang. Sometimes it's just one child getting into it with another, but big on accountability. DC is resource heavy. We have so many resources. I think about a young man who was shot and killed. everyone said, "Oh, he's with our program. He was with our program." But who's really, how did he get killed? How did that happen? Who's being held accountable, for these programs, for these resources? Yeah, snap to that. And even, when a child gets locked up, like he said, they go right back to that same environment that they were left in. Where's the rehabilitation at?
And there's no coordination from the perspective of a parent. So, we have this problem with the carjacking spreading. Community is upset, reacting, asking our elected and law enforcement to do more. So some kids are being detained now at a higher frequency than they were before. Did we plan for that? Are the juvenile detention facilities beds expanded? No. So now they're overcrowded. So I have a kid who was arrested a couple of weeks ago, witnessed a riot at one of the DYRS facilities. It didn't even get in the news. Sometimes they get in the news. I don't know why. Sometimes the riots at the juvenile facilities are in the news. Sometimes they are. A couple weeks ago, 2 weekends ago, 3 weekends ago, they blur. It was a riot, and it's because they were overcrowded. Because we go, oh, we've got a problem. We're going to have to change how we do things, but we don't plan for it. So then those kids are harmed. As we're trying to solve another problem, we create a new one. It's a mess.
Charles, you gotta tell the truth about some of this stuff. Y'all not telling the whole story.
Hold on, Ron.
People need to hear the whole story.
Hold on, Ron.
Not bits and pieces.
So one of the things I was going to say to Ms. Hardy is, yes, this city is resource rich, but coordination poor, right? That is a big part of our challenge. When it comes to YSC, and that leads into one of the questions here, the council had to fight to keep the oversight body over DYRS and YSC because it was proposed to be just eliminated, meaning there would be no oversight over what's happening at YSC and within DYRS. We've been able to hold that. But one of the questions someone asked is trying to help understand, and this is related, processing of juveniles. We're hearing a common statement that juveniles are released before the arresting officers finish with the paperwork. I think someone said before the ink dries, right? Is there an option to have that young person be held overnight to let the officer's paperwork be completed for the juvenile to feel at least some type of consequences? Is the question. So, Mr. Schwab, I might go to you on that in terms of the initial hold is going to be when that individual is arrested. But in terms of making the determination about papering or no papering, where does that come in the process?
The decision's made right at the moment of a young person. If they come in at night, they're locked up until the morning and they're on the morning lockup list. And the police bring what evidence they have to support the making of the arrest to the prosecutors in my office, who assess the evidence and make a decision, usually right then and there. When we have enough evidence to hold somebody, they are held. We go to court, we argue if we think the community's at risk, if we think this young person is a risk to other people, we argue to a court. We have a system of due process where a judge hears the argument, where, thank goodness, the juvenile has a defense attorney, and we have a process that works because we want to live in a country where it happens that way. Where our prosecutors don't have enough evidence, we don't hold people, because that's not what we do in America. When you don't have enough evidence to charge somebody, you don't lock somebody up and wait for the paperwork to come later. If there's something where you're actually working up a case, we don't release. But once the decision is made, the prosecutorial judgment is made, it's either a detention or a release, charge or no charge.
Yeah, and I'll ask this question, and then Mr. Graves, you can jump in too. Earlier, or 6 months ago or so, the council passed legislation to expand the ability to have pretrial holds, meaning that in crimes of violence, there's an increasing likelihood that the courts will order someone to be held pretrial, so before they have actually been found guilty. What do you see as the impact of that? And are you seeing those numbers go up? And to the point around YSC, you are going to see an increase in the number of that. The population at DOC, our Department of Corrections, has gone up dramatically in the last several months. Where do you see that impact, and how do you evaluate the effectiveness?
So 2 different moments in the system. The first is the original charging decision. But once a charge has been made against the young person, then there's a question of whether pending trial, should that young person be locked up pending trial or be on release. And the law did change in terms of some of the crimes for which there is a presumption of pretrial detention. I think the net result is going to be we're going to see more kids locked up in a system that has marginal capacity right now to absorb more people. And so none of these decisions are costless. All of these decisions have cost. Do we as a community build more prisons and more places to lock people up? Does that sound familiar in terms of what our country has done previously to try to address crime? Are we as a community ready to commit the resources to building more prisons and more detention facilities? And are we willing to acknowledge that when we lock young people up and we put them in places where they are detained and potentially at risk, sometimes we cause harm? That also has a cost to society. So these are tough decisions, and fortunately, I think we have a rule of law, and people in our respective offices try to make the best judgments we can, exercising our discretion to try to keep our community safe now and in the long run.
I promised Mr. Graves first, and then Ms. Hardy, I'll come back to you.
So I just want to kind of go a little deeper on the ink drying comment, right? Because I've heard this frustration, and I think there's a lot of confusion about what happens immediately after an arrest. So if you are arrested on a felony, particularly a violent felony, you are arrested and immediately detained. You then have to be presented on a charge if you're going to be charged. That usually occurs within 24 to 48 hours of your arrest. So everybody arrested on a felony is held for a day, and in some cases, if it's over a weekend, 2 days before they are presented. No one is immediately out before the paperwork literally dries. We know with violent felonies, because we put the numbers up, that the overwhelming number of those people are charged, right? We make the decision when they're presented to charge them with at least an offense. Then what happens next is we have to make a decision about whether we're going to seek their pretrial detention. In our office with violent felonies, people that are carrying illegal firearms, we typically do. They are then entitled to a detention hearing where the judge gets to decide. That happens within roughly 3 days of their initial appearance. In a lot of offenses, unfortunately, particularly offenses that don't involve actual violence, just possessing illegal firearms, the judges make the decision to release them at that point. So the person is held roughly, maximally 4 to 5 days during that period. Then they're back out in the street. Now, I understand the concern coming from the community. It feels like this person was just arrested for something that was pretty serious, and they are back out in the street, and there's no accountability. The system that we have in DC presumes that people are going to be released pending trial. There is accountability. They have been charged. They will one day face trial, but they are back out in the street. So that's what people are seeing. So the system can be moving towards a prosecution and accountability, but you don't see the results of it, which just adds to the frustration. So I just wanted to kind of demystify the process a little bit so you understand things can be happening even if you see the same person back out on the same corner.
Thanks. Ms. Hardy?
Yeah, just to add to that, I know we're talking about car theft, but, I focus a lot on gang violence. And, when you were talking about the charges, I couldn't help to think about Micaiah Wilson, Karan Brown, Davon McNeil. These were all children under 12 years old, innocent children. They were all shot and killed, and all of their killers received 9 years.
I'm sorry, so that's Micaiah Wilson. We just went to trial in that case. A number of them were convicted of first-degree murder and received over 30 years.
Okay, Karan Brown. What about Karan Brown?
So each case is different in terms of what you can do. The homicides, you have to look at the law in the district. It is exceedingly difficult to prove first-degree murder. No one is going to plead to first-degree murder because it is a 30-year mandatory minimum. So you're signing up for a trial. And I want to come back to Micaiah Wilson for obvious reasons, because the underlying facts for those not familiar with the tragedy.
Hold on. If we're going to talk about Micaiah Wilson, we got to talk about Karan Brown also.
So I'm going to focus on Micaiah Wilson.
Yeah, and then we're going to go to Karan Brown next.
So
Davon McNeil.
A group of young men went into a courtyard that they were retaliating against and just randomly opened fire, tragically striking Micaiah Wilson and a number of other individuals. For obvious reasons, we didn't have a lot of eyewitnesses that were willing to come forward to the Metropolitan Police Department and talked about what they saw from this incredibly violent group. So what we had to do with the Metropolitan Police Department was carefully and painstakingly put together through their social media posts, through search warrant executions, a tale without any eyewitnesses of why the shooting occurred and linking a group of 9 individuals to it. It took years to put together. The trial went for 3 months. But we secured multiple first-degree murder convictions, and that's what it looks like. And we were able to do that because we were able to find the evidence in that case. But in a lot of our homicide cases, we don't have witnesses, or if we do have witnesses, there's extremely challenging baggage behind their testimony. They themselves might have been the perpetrators of violent crimes. They might have extensive criminal histories. They might have originally lied to the police about what happened. There are also, in a lot of these cases, self-defense issues. Not self-defense issues with the kids, but sometimes people are shooting back at people they think are trying to harm them. As a matter of law, that is a defense in the district. You will not get a first-degree murder conviction. You will most likely get a voluntary manslaughter while armed conviction. There are something called the sentencing guidelines that guide where judges go at the time of sentencing. In voluntary manslaughter while armed, an acceptable sentence, the low end of the range that the judges can sentence to for someone with no or limited criminal history is 7.5 years. So when you hear a number being thrown around like 9 or 10 years, think about all those factors. Whether there was self-defense at play, not against the child, but against people that they were shooting at. Think about whether we have witnesses that are willing to testify against violent people. And think about that an obvious, likely outcome at trial, if we go all that way and do all that work, is a voluntary manslaughter conviction where someone can get less than 9 years.
And I agree with everything you're saying, but, just you have to see it from my side also. We're in the community, these mothers, all they see is that the person that shot their child got 9 years. I'm not saying all that doesn't go on, and I'm glad that I'm learning this side of it. But, in the community and the hundreds of people that live in their community, the children, all they see is, oh, man, he only got 9 years. So thanks for that view.
I gotta say something.
Ron, hold on.
But Davon
No,
McNeil's
Ron,
killer got 9 years.
Ron, that's, nope.
I want to break up. I've been doing this for 30 years. You're going to hear what I got to say. So what I want to say, we're talking about a small group of people, all right? The people who keep coming back and terrorizing the community, I don't even blame them. I blame the system, like this guy was saying right here. If somebody comes home from prison or a youth comes home from the playground down D-Wires, because it's a playground, let's be clear. They end up playing Grand Theft Auto. They get locked up for Grand Theft Auto, get locked up and play Grand Theft Auto. All right, so you tell me where that makes sense, okay? So they come back home, and then we've done this before in D.C., where we force the government to do what's right by our children. What does that look like? If a child comes home with a violent offense, like everybody's up here saying, because that's the system, you don't have no control over that. But what we can have control over is when they come home, we have stipulations where you have them in a program where the children, we do a curfew every day, and we check in their house to make sure they make the curfew. We go to their school every day. We're doing programming like this sister does, takes them out of town, give them exposure, teach them things that they don't know. And the most important thing, case management. What we did was fight the system, because the normal situation that we're talking about with these young children, the case management is 25 to 1, y'all. So you asking somebody to manage this child and 25 other children. We got them to do it 5 to 1. So that case manager was like a surrogate parent. And that's how you change a life. Now that costs more money, but the money they throwing out in the street right now, we would have been got to the bottom of this, because it's not like they always say, it's not a zillion bad children that's doing all this stuff. But a few bad children are enough to turn this city upside down, and they have. And I've been saying this for years, and the person who started this stuff, Vinny Girardi, is now out Baltimore, messing Baltimore up. All right? Just go read your stories. And this is the model y'all been following. These people who come in our community who are clueless and telling us what we should be doing in our city when some of us have changed. We changed this stuff. But to let somebody violent come home and there's no accountability, and we don't give these youngers what they need, because most of them want what's right, but they also want tough love too. They don't want us to just let them run up and down the street. They want love and protection. But we gotta do this, Charles. We can't keep on talking about the prosecutor, the attorney general's office, right? We gotta say, what are we gonna put in place to make sure when these young people come home, everybody feels good. The community feels good because they feel safe, because somebody's monitoring them. And the mothers who asking for help, half the time, the mothers say, please don't let my child go. Do you know how many children have been killed that the mothers had asked them not to release because they knew they weren't ready? They knew about the beats that's going on in the street, and our city lets them out to get killed? Do you know how many times that's happened in D.C.? I can go back to Marcel Murd, where I told him don't release him. He came home, killed 5 people. 5 people before him and another child was dumped on the Suitland Parkway. So if you listen to the people who on the ground who really know what's going on, instead of paying people like David Muhammad to come from out of town and keep on getting paid from our city and leading us down a drain, then things will get better.
All right, Ron. Thank you, Ron. All right, I appreciate it. So our time is about up, since we were 8:35 and I was told to stop by 8:30. So I think I want to thank all of our panelists. Part of what I think we heard throughout the night here is identifying some of, not all, some of what we believe those motivations to be, talking about the different parts of both accountability and some of the ways in which that happens and what it looks like, but also think identifying spaces. I think the ideas that we just talked about, where a young person is going to be, is no papered, but is completely dropped off. And I think we heard very firsthand what the pain looks like from a family and for the individual, and then what that looks like. So part of what we want to do is, as a community, take a lot of these ideas, take the work that we're going to be doing from this, both what that looks like for the AG and the USAO and what their jobs are and their work there, what MPD's job is, Office of Gun Violence, our community partners, the council, and everyone. So I appreciate everybody taking the time to be able to walk through a lot of these issues and a lot of the hard work they're going to do. I want to thank again to the Hill RAG and to everybody who helped co-sponsor and pull this event together. Thanks to everybody who joined us online as well, and appreciate your time here. And so can we give our panelists a big round of applause, please? All right, and I think we're going to hang around for a little bit if anybody wants to catch us one-on-one. But again, thanks everybody for having a good time, and I appreciate the conversation tonight.
And really quick, you guys, if you would like to support, please follow us on Instagram, Guns Down Friday, and our website is www.gunsdownfriday.com. www.gunsdownfriday.com. Thank you, guys.